Madam Chair, we are live.
Thank you, Mrs. DeGraw. We'll go ahead and call our regular meeting to order. Mr. Cottle, would you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone to our meeting today, and we appreciate Mr. Burtonshaw being here with us via telephone. The floor would be open for a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
With Mr. Burtonshaw being on the phone, we will do a roll call vote for everything. Mr. Cottle.
Aye.
Mrs. Rigby.
Aye.
Mrs. Perkins.
Aye.
Mr. Burtonshaw.
Aye.
Thank you. Mrs. DeGraw, did we have any public comment?
Oh, no.
Thank you. Right, moving along, the floor would be open for a motion to approve the consent agenda, including financial, personnel, and minutes.
Madam Chair, I so move that we approve these.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Again, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cottle.
Aye.
Mrs. Rigby.
Aye.
Mrs. Perkins.
Aye.
And Mr. Burtonshaw. Motion passes. Thank you. Our first action item is purchase approvals.
Madam Chair, we have a purchase approval that the district is requiring for the water fountain upgrades. The bottle filling, there's 7, I believe, 7 or 8. Mrs. Crowdy, remember the exact number?
There are 7 that we just purchased, but there was 1 that we previously purchased, so we
that's why
have
we-
8 purchased for campus.
And so these we purchased, as this is over the $10,000 amount, it does require approval from the district,
From the board.
from the board.
I'm excited. Glad they're here.
Yes.
All right. The floor would be open for a motion to approve the proposed water fountain purchase.
Madam Chair, I so move.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay.
We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cottle.
Aye.
Mrs. Rigby.
Aye.
Mrs. Perkins.
Aye.
Mr. Burtonshaw.
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. And next, we have our financial audit report.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to turn the time over. We've had Rudd and Company complete our audit again this year. Scott Bond is generally the one that will come and do that, but he is at a different district presenting today. And so we've asked Teresa, I can't remember your last name.
Flannery.
Teresa Flannery, and she's been great. She came and helped with the audit here. And so she'll be doing the presentation. What was your thought, Mrs. Brown?
Can she just come sit up?
Yeah,
here,
so
Mr.
we'll just
Burtonshaw?
invite her to come and sit where Mr. Burtonshaw usually does, so she will be able to address the board from here. Each of the board members has in front of them a copy of the audit in full. As she'll go over that. So Teresa, we'll just turn the time over to you and thank you and go over that from there.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. We appreciate the time to come and speak with you. It's always fun. So there's 3 pieces of this report that belong to Rudd and Company, and then the rest of the report is actually your guys's. So I'm going to go over those 3 pieces in detail, and the rest of it we'll just kind of pick and choose and look at some important things. The first one is on page 1. This is our independent auditor's report. This is the report on the actual numbers within the financial statement and whether or not we believe they're fairly presented. And you can have a qualified, unmodified, adverse. There's quite a few options. And you can see kind of the list on that very first page. We have 1 qualified and the rest are unmodified. The qualification is pretty typical in smaller districts. There is a requirement to have your OPEB liability, which is related to retirement benefits on healthcare for retirees. And that requires an actuarial study. We don't have the capacity to do those. So, the actuarial study is pretty costly or can be, and most of smaller districts forego that unless you need bonding or some third party that's gonna need that information. So that qualification will remain there until that study is completed. And it's basically just saying that it hasn't been done.
And that's one for the board remembers. We have had that discussion in previous board meetings and have elected not to, based on the cost of that. And the cost benefit was weighed by the district, so that's what we've talked about.
Okay, that is the biggest piece on that one. Other than that, it's a pass with flying colors, right? School district, so we want BA. The next section, starting on page 6, is management's discussion and analysis. And Scott typically doesn't spend a lot of time in this, and we probably won't spend time in that this year. But there are a couple things that I enjoy pointing out and looking at. Mostly the comparative information, because it's the only place in your financial statements that you get comparative data. So page 10 has a comparative schedule of revenues and expenditures, and page 8 has a comparative schedule of assets and liabilities. And those are kind of fun to look at for that year-over-year perspective and to gain a few insights there. Note that these items are full accrual basis, so it's not the normal methodology of the district to run their stuff in. So it's got things like capital assets, which you usually see as expenses, not as assets, and debt, which you usually see as expenses, not as debt. So it's a little bit of a different format, but as long as you keep that in mind, it gives you some good perspective. We will jump over though to page 17. And this is again on that full accrual basis, so the numbers are slightly different from what you'd see on normally. But I really love this schedule because there's one thing that it shows that you don't see anywhere else, which is the relationship between funding received and dollars spent. So that first column, the expenditures, you can see by function what the district has spent. And then column 3 and column 2, you can see the revenues directly attributable to those dollars. So this is a dollar for dollar reimbursement or dollar for dollar grant or charges for services. And those things offset those costs dollar for dollar. But as you can see, the majority of those costs are not offset. And I think this is a powerful statement for why we have the need for state funding, for property tax, for some of those additional funding sources, because there just isn't dollar for dollar representation for every cost. And so I love kind of looking at this and seeing those deficits and then how those are made up for, which is the general revenues at the bottom, property taxes, local support, state support that is not dollar for dollar, and then other items that come in. So I just spend a minute there. And then we'll jump over to what you're more used to seeing, which is page 18 and 19. This is your fund level, and most of your attention probably is spent on that general fund because that's where a lot of the dollars flow through. There are 6 major funds for the district, and those are required by state legislation, which is child nutrition, debt service, capital projects, and plant facilities. And this year we have 2 plant facility funds, which is the property tax relief fund, that's new. And that is funded by state money that's supposed to help replace or take the burden off of patrons for paying property taxes. So they gave it to you instead of charging it through property taxes, and then you can put it back to those same uses. So for debt, supplemental levy, capital projects, in a specific order. On these funds, the big thing that I like to focus in on is your fund balance. So that's second line from the bottom. The fund balance is kind of that litmus test for how are we doing. Scott recommends about 3 months. I typically don't recommend a number. I'll kind of recommend maybe if you have a 10-year projection for what you think your costs are going to be, that should give you a pretty good estimate. So somewhere between 3 months and 4 or 5 months. You don't want to keep too much in there because again, this is taxpayer dollars. And so unless you have specific purposes, specific sources, that number is generally kind of going to keep toward that 3-month level.
So what do you think of our fund balance?
So to see that in better perspective of your expenses, look at pages 21 and 22. So your fund balance pretty much doubled from last year and in the general fund. It went from 674,000, that third to last line. Or, sorry, 608,000, the second to last line, and then 674 was the current year added to it. So for a total of 1.2 million. So if we look at that in context of the expenditures for the year and that, which is just shy of 6 million. 3 months would be something around 200,000, so you've got all about 6 months in your fund balance. So it's a pretty strong fund balance.
And would you suggest bringing that down?
I never suggest bringing your fund balance down.
Well, I don't
But-
like it either, but I'm wondering
Yeah.
what they. what-
No, there's no specific suggestion, there's no specific requirement related to the general fund. That is, like I said, I look at your 10-year averages, your 10-year projections. What are things that are gonna do? Are we gonna have to build an elementary school? And by having some in our fund balance, we could buy the land out of fund balance and we could, do the levy for the rest. Or how can we save the patrons in the most effective way? That's what I would look at to determine whether you feel like you have too much or too little. So child nutrition and debt service both do have requirements attached to them. So child nutrition is technically not supposed to have more than 3 months of operations. So that would be about, let's see, 320 divided by 12. I didn't do the math, sorry. But about 3 months, and you've got a little over that. That's a slap on the wrist. They don't really penalize you for having too much, but the state does come in and say, what's your plan? How are you going to use those funds appropriately? Because if the funds are getting too large, what that means is we're either charging students too much or, something else we're not replacing the equipment like we're supposed to be. We're understaffing or underpaying staff. So they like to see that fund balance stay pretty low. So that one does have requirements. Debt service similarly has a requirement for 18 months. You can hold up to 18 months worth of payments in your debt service fund. If you have more than that, they suggest you reduce your levy, you refund, you do something to so that you're not just sitting on patron funds. They've paid that in for the benefit of the district, so they suggest you use that. But again, you're in a good place there. Your current year expenditures or debt payments was about 318,000 and you have 460. So you're just over that yearly requirement, which is perfect. So the other ones all look really strong. You don't have any funds in a negative position, which is great. And so I say from just looking at this page, you're in a pretty healthy position. The district is doing pretty well. Okay, so I'm gonna jump over into some of the note disclosures now, page 26. I talked about that new fund, so it's just got a description of the purposes of that new fund, the second bullet point from the top. And it just kind of goes into some information. And the reason I point that out is I know that board members get asked a lot of questions that the district doesn't, or you're not here on a day-to-day basis. And so sometimes it's nice to know where your resources are to be able to answer some of those questions. And your financial statement can provide a lot of that information. So what I'm pointing out are just resources to keep in the back of your head when somebody says, well, you got a couple $100,000 in this property tax relief, so why are you still charging property taxes? You can point them to this spot, you can point them obviously back to the district, but that's kind of my purpose. So we have that explanation there on page 30. In conjunction with the audit report, we also provided each of you at the very back of your folder, there's the letter. And this is the letter we provide every year. There's a couple of things in here that talk about stuff we saw. And because we audit a risk-based audit, that means anytime there is a risk, we want you to be aware of it. So this you see every year from us, which is the cash and investments risk discussion. You can have up to $250,000 in any one institution under the EIN of the district, and that is protected funds. If you have more than that, then those are called uncollateralized or unprotected. And if the bank were to fail, those funds would not be guaranteed to come back to the district. And so that's a risk that we just point out. Now,
And you say we have that.
yes, you have, so on page 30 and also mentioned in the letter, number 3 in the letter. 2.9 million of your deposits were not covered under that depository insurance. Now, I caveat that by saying payroll comes right at the end of the month. So you close the books on June 30th. You run payroll like the week before that. You obviously have to have funds to be able to pay that payroll. So there's things that you will not be able to avoid in going over that insurance limitation, but you just want to watch that and mitigate that as much as possible. We don't want to keep $2.9 million in those uninsured funds. We want to keep that at kind of the minimum level so that your risk is less. Any questions on that? Okay. Jumping over to page 34. There was a new standard that came into effect in fiscal 24. It's dovetails on the new standard that came into effect in fiscal 23, which related to leases. And this year it's information technology arrangements. In other words, agreements that have a strong component of software use or, cloud use or protected software like Sophos, any of those kinds of things. If you have a multi-year agreement, you're now required to put that onto your balance sheet, just like any other debt, because you've signed a contract for those multiple years. So they say, well, if you sign that contract, then you technically are under liability to pay that. So we want to show that liability. So they've moved that onto the page and you can see that there was a subscription. I think it was just one subscription for your district, and that is shown at the very bottom of that capital asset table. That's the value of it as far as an asset goes. And then there's a matching liability that sits in your balance sheet. And just like the leases, it just expires as the agreement expires. And it disappears. This is another one just for your knowledge, page 37. For long-term debt, I hear a lot of districts get questions about that. So I just point out where that is. That note number 7 is the changes in it. There's a schedule of your payment schedule is the page before on page 36. And so if anybody asks questions on that, you can come to that spot. Page 51, this is mentioned in our letter as well. This is expenditures in excess of budget. So state requirements say that your budget has to be balanced and you can't exceed your expenditures. And so whenever you do, we just have to disclose that. Now, I want you to note that the amounts are not hugely significant. We've got 3,001, 5,001, so they're pretty small. The biggest one, student activities, I mean, that's hard to judge. So this isn't suggesting that you're doing anything wrong in the budgeting process. This is just disclosure information to in line with those state requirements. And I guess the concern would come if you had a deficit of fund balance, which you don't, or if these numbers were pretty big and there wasn't a valid reason that you could, say, oh, that went over because of XYZ. So that's when those would start to be, well, maybe we need to pay a little more attention to this. But to me, this looks like you're doing a pretty good job in that budgeting process.
And, one thing we have to remember that when we put the budget together, it's in May.
Mhm.
And some of these funds don't come available. And like a specific example on this page, the vocational education fund of 36,000. So when we see a funding like this, it's like, oh, wow, you guys overspent that budget by 36,000. But what happened with this situation was we started the budget, and in September or October of that year, we had a surprise allocation that the state said, surprise, here's a one-time fund for CTE of 36,000. And it's a use it or lose it fund. And so when the district receives that, we didn't stop and say, well, for us to not have this show up on this audit, we need to reconvene, have a budget hearing, redo the budget to show that we just received $36,000 more. We just spend it. And
And those funds, that award letter didn't make it to me. It hadn't crossed my desk until June after our budget hearing.
And so even then it wasn't be able to be amended. So it was money that we had available that wasn't available when we first did the budget. we could have had it on the amendment, but it got lost in that. But as we were finalizing the year, we said, we have 36,000 needs to be spent. And CTE was able to go out and buy their things to meet that. So that's why sometimes these things do come up. And it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's for budgeting. It's just, but it does say, at the beginning of the year, you said you were only gonna spend this much and you spent this much more. That's what this is saying.
Yeah.
There could be good reasons why.
Yeah, thank you for that additional explanation. And you can see that on pages 72 to all the way through about 70. 78 or 77. This is those smaller funds, and so they didn't make it up to the front page, but we do give the detail for that, and you can see, you know, as you look at it, that, for instance, the Public School Technology Fund, which is the third on page 73. Revenues was 144,000, and you spent that down and on the projects that you had identified for it. Professional development, voc ed, all of those were, when you look toward the change in net or change in fund balance, which is the third from the bottom, you can see all those are positive or near zero. And that's what determines, you know, if you saw huge negatives and you didn't have fund balance and you weren't planning on it, that would be when you'd kind of be concerned about those overages. Okay. Page 54, and we have a couple more. I know you're looking at your watch.
I'm not looking at the time. Sometimes I get messages from other things going on. You're doing great, Tracy. Take all the time you want, because when you're finished, they have to listen to me.
So this one describes those fund balances and kind of how they're allocated. There's a couple different terminology that we use for them. So restricted funds means some sort of external organization has given you requirements for the way that those funds can be spent. You don't have flexibility. I mean, you do within the jurisdiction of whatever it is. So for child nutrition, anything that's related to child nutrition can spend those funds, but you couldn't buy textbooks for English class with it. Those kinds of restrictions. And then committed is, if it's not restricted by external law, but there is kind of a purpose for it, and that is determined by the board, then it is committed. And so that is kind of the next step down. Below that, and you don't have any, would be assigned, and that would be if Carrie has said, we need to set aside, you know, $500,000 for some huge thing that's coming down the road, then you could assign funds because you guys didn't necessarily approve it, but she's determined that it's necessary. And so that, again, next step down, right? External, board, then management. And then unassigned is everything that's kind of left over. You'll notice the only one that is allowed to have unassigned is the general fund. So there's ones like, which I don't think you guys have any, but federal forest money doesn't have any strings to it, really. You can use it for any operations or anything that you need to use it for. But we still list that as committed or restricted because by nature, it is not general fund money. Now, if you transfer it to general fund, then it can become unrestricted. So this is kind of a good snapshot of where everything sits and where it was, where it needs to be used. Okay, and then budget to actual, just revisiting the general fund in specific. This is page 56. And overall, there was an anticipated loss in the original budget. It wasn't very much, but there was a loss. And then the final budget that was done had a positive. So you had received additional funding, almost 250,000 just in state funding that came to you. That wasn't initially anticipated. And then property taxes came in higher than initially anticipated. And so between those, you ended up rebudgeting and saying, okay, now we anticipate ending up positive, and you actually doubled that amount when your actual numbers came in. So you want to make sure that your budgets are as clear as possible, but they can't ever be exact. And I think this is a really good demonstration of that. But as long as you've got a purpose for what you're spending and why you're spending, This is just kind of a picture to show, not a reason, not a cause. Does that make sense? Okay, so we already talked about the non-major funds, but any questions on the federal funds? Okay, so the last two letters, I mentioned there were three that belong to Rudd and the rest of it's yours. The last two letters start on page 79. Or sorry, last letter. You guys didn't have a single audit, so it's just this one. So page 79 is the letter on your internal controls. And this is, we look at internal controls not to audit them, but to look and see if we see any holes or any concerns we have with the way that those processes are happening within the district. And if we find those concerns, then we make sure we put it in this letter, and then we have a little bit in the other letter as well to clarify. And we did have one concern that we brought up in this letter. And it's written out on page 81. And there's a lot of language in here, so just in summary, there was some issues in the reconciliation process for the bank accounts. And at the end of the year, they hadn't been reconciled, and so when we came into audit, we didn't have a number really that we could look at. So you guys contracted with us, we assisted in figuring out what was going on with those reconciliations and helping get that caught up. And at the end of the day, there was a change in your cash of about 1.3 million. There were a couple missing payments and just different things in there. And so that was a large enough dollar amount and a large enough change that we needed to make a comment on it and let you know that that had happened.
And that finding those is an increase. So it was
Yes,
actually
it's a positive.
the finding was a positive. And so sometimes when people hear, oh, 1.3 million, you're like, oh no, what happened
You're
there?
right, yeah.
But it was in the positive.
Yep, there was a state payment. That was the biggest piece of it, 1.1 million that had not been recorded. So figured that out and got it fixed. Any questions? All right.
I want to say thank you this is the first time I haven't had Scott, and he got some competition. Like, he did a great job. Great job of explaining that. So thank you for the time, and also thank you again for coming in with the additional time and working with Carrie in the office. It's been such a great experience. I'm just wanting to let our board know that. We're always looking for ways to improve, and I think we're moving in a good direction, and I feel good about where we're at financially, so thank you.
Yeah, we love working with your district. It's a wonderful district. So thank you for the opportunity.
Teresa, thank you so much.
Feel free to stick around. There's more food in the
Right?
kitchen there if you need to, so.
Thank you.
Right, so we need to approve.
So,
There we go.
so just certify the completion is what
Thank you.
the wording is on that.
The chair will entertain a motion to certify the completion of the 23-24 financial audit report. Madam Chair, I so move. Is there a second?
I second that.
We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cottle,
Aye.
Mrs. Rigby.
Aye.
Mrs. Perkins.
Aye.
And Mr. Burtonshaw.
Aye.
That's great. That motion passes. Thank you. On to informational and discussion items. First, we have the superintendent report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will get into the superintendent report, but I do want to just make a statement. It's we have posted some unfortunate news in the district. And so this is a release that we did put out on our social media concerning a really difficult thing that our district is going through right now. We do have an employee that has been dismissed due to charges, legal charges. This is something that as superintendent, I do have to report on the good and the bad. And unfortunately, this is one of the hardest things that we may have to go through. But I do want people to know that we are fully cooperating with the law enforcement. The employee question has been dismissed from the district. And if there's anyone else that has any other information concerning this, please contact local law enforcement. And again, our thoughts are with the victim and family during this difficult time, and we will continue to train and safeguard. I know that through this process, before the investigation started, I do have to commend individuals who had information that brought it to administration. That allowed an investigation to go forward, and I commend those individuals for being brave enough to bring that forward. It does show that although we cannot stop these types of things from always happening, that we do have measures in place to help it be stopped when that information comes to us. Again, that is unfortunate information in our district, and like I said, I have to do the positives and the negatives. So I'm hoping to move into some positive things, because that's a tough situation for our district. But we still are going to continue to move forward, and that's one thing that as a district, we have to take the good and the bad. And as I've rallied with administration, different key components of our supervisors, and we have a plan to move forward. We're gonna do the very, very, very best we can. And so I want to share some of this good information that we have going on, even in light of having heavy heart and really sadness for what we're going through. On a positive note, I did inform the board earlier this year that we received a grant in conjunction with Clark County School District. And so we have hired jointly between the two districts, Jolynn Burnshaw. She shared a little bit with herself on our district website. We're grateful to have her. She will be helping with things to help us get procedures in place in the schools when it comes to having, what do we call that? They've got the immunizations. I was like, immunization, I couldn't even think of the word. My goodness, I just had a blank there. But, and we will have clinics. One thing I'd be very clear about, we will not immunize anyone without parental permission.
The parent has to be present.
Parent also can't just send a note saying, please do it. The parent needs to be standing there when that happens. I know that sometimes there's been confusion on some social medias and things like that schools are going to force these items. In no way with us, with this, does this happen. And so we're grateful for her. She'll be here a couple times a week. She's going to help write plans for some of our students that require health plans. It's just going to be a great step in the right direction.
Once a week here, once a week in Clark County.
So is she the one that is going to help the girls get their CNA?
No, and so that's a difference. So the question that was asked is she the one that helps with the CNA? This is a different. Her role is to focus on student health here.
Okay.
We still will contract out with the CNA program individual that we've had. And so we still have that program in place. Good question. The second bullet right here is in expanding the arts grant we applied for and received approximately $3,200 for an arts grant from the State Board of Education. That money will be able to go towards the drama program. Mrs. Erickson will be able to purchase a program to help with the technology part of the plays. And we do have our play coming up here this next week. And so that technology money won't be there yet to be spent on it, but she'll be able to get that and use it for those. The other part of that is Mrs. Parker in the orchestra and band will be able to continue to fix and purchase, fix old instruments and purchase new ones. Last week, Superintendent of Public Instruction Debbie Critchfield visited our school district, and it was a fun visit to have her here. I brought her into the office. I was able to share some great things that we are doing. And she actually put on her website some of the good things that she saw here. Now, I do have to say, Mrs. Scott is one of the best gift givers I've ever seen in my life. Between her and Mrs. Annie Dowling, they put together a swag bag that I don't think is ever going to be matched in Superintendent Critchfield's history. So she's, if not, we set the bar so high. But one of that even included M&Ms with Debbie Critchfield's face on that. I don't know if that's creepy or awesome, but I still trying to figure out if it's somewhere in the middle. But it was a lot of fun to have her here. On that, the state department, Idaho State Department of Education, on Superintendent Critchfield's post, she did highlight a few things, and she just said Tarleton Elementary is recognized as one of the top performing schools in the state. ranking in the top 10th percentile on some key performance measures. And also, she mentioned that 73% of the junior high educators and 85% of the high school educators have 6 or more years of experience in teaching. I think that's commendable, and that goes back to even before I was superintendent with the supplemental levy, allowing us to retain new and recruit teachers. Having trained teachers is one of the most important things that we can do. So that, again, that's been work that's done with previous boards, previous superintendents through now, and we're continuing to do that. So thank you. Senior night for the volleyball and cross country has taken place. The football one was on October 6th, and so there's our seniors. It's homecoming week. It's a very busy week with a lot of different things. They've had powder puff. Thank you to the Booster Club. They had a tailgate party with free street tacos from Park Avenue Grill. The Booster Club provided those. It was a hit. The line was very long for those, but the tacos were delicious. And so that was great. Panther Olympics are going on tomorrow, and the homecoming game will start at 4:30 with the JV. Panther Olympics will be in the Panther Den. Board members, community members, you're welcome to come to that. It's free of charge. There's a lot of fun activities that go on with that. Boone Burtonshaw at the fair, he donated one of his extra pigs to be sold at the fair, and he asked the fair board if he could sell one extra pig and then donate that money to the school to go towards extracurriculars. The pig was sold 3 times, Brolum's, the Todd Simmons Farms, and the Lee Burtonshaw. Again, I just appreciate like these community members, these businesses, they support the youth. When I see the names of these groups, Brolum's has always been good, and of course the Todd Simmons and Lee Burtonshaw. I'm like, Lee Burtonshaw, you bought the pig and then you donated, then you bought it back again. And so good for Boone. Boone's a senior here at West Jefferson. Here's a picture of me and Boone and Mrs. Day, one of his ag teachers. And so that check was approximately $3,900. It will be put into an account to be used for activities and clubs as a scholarship. That we can be used to help students who may need a little bit of extra support to participate in extracurriculars or clubs. And so that will be something that will be under the direction of administration on how that is to be allocated. And so thank you for that. Here's some more stuff from the visit from Superintendent Critchfield. There's a picture of Mrs. Erickson and myself there. This is Panthelina. Every Monday, Mrs. Erickson has welcome back to school. We're glad you're here. Let's get ready to learn assembly with the kids, and that's her outfit for that. Next Monday, the Hamer PTO will put on the Halloween Carnival. So it's 2. Is it 2? Okay, I should have the calendar open in front of me. I know it's a Monday. I don't even know what they were on, but in 2 Mondays on the 28th. It's going to be a little bit different. In the past, they would have you buy little tickets. This year, it's just going to be buy a wristband. There'll be a dinner that can be purchased, and these proceeds will go into the Hamer PTO and just help support the activities and things for the kids up there. It's a lot of fun if the people can make it to it. Like I said, there's a lot of really good things going on. I do commend our district. I know we've had some hard things. We're dealing with some hard things, but I don't want to lose sight of the momentum of the good things that we have keep going. And I do, as superintendent, want to assure you that I'm going to give it my all. I know my staff is going to double down and do all that they can to continue in spite of the difficulties and hardships that we are going through right now. So thank you, school board. Any comments or questions that you guys have? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. All right, next we're going to talk about the bond and ESSER spending update.
All right, we have, can you believe that we've actually survived the pandemic and now we're to the end of the ESSER money spending?
You know, there was a bright spot in the
Yeah.
pandemic, and that was, look at the equipment that
Yes.
we have now.
Yep.
Look at how far.
And I really appreciate, even looking full circle, I appreciate our community. That was hard. That was a hard time. There was so many unknowns. And even though there was some maybe disagreements or some some worries over, our community was really great. Even those that had concerns, they shared them in a positive way. We didn't have the meetings with insults and everything, even though there was some concerns about masks and all of that. And I have to commend our community for stepping up. That was one thing that we as a board, when I first came out as superintendent, it was, we can have discussions, and we call them rumbles from Brene Brown, but we can have those discussions in a positive way. And through all that, we have been able to update technology, some different processes and the funding. So go ahead.
But I would like to say that I felt like during that period, I was worried about some of the decisions we made, wondering, but I felt the strength of leadership. I did. And I think that's what got me through, was that you never wavered in how you felt about kids being in school.
Mhm.
And that didn't happen in a lot of places across
Thank
this
you.
country. And think about how nice that is for our kids to have not had to stay home.
Yeah, and we did miss the last
We missed
month and
some,
2
but
months.
nothing compared to the rest of the
to the country. That's a great point. Thank you. I appreciate that. And we weren't gonna back down. I wish, in hindsight, I wish we would have stayed in and then kept going. I really
We
do.
just didn't know.
But we didn't know, but we
We
also
just-
didn't have a choice. We were told that
Not then.
funding would be pulled
Yeah.
if we didn't on that last one, but it is, I'm glad that this is leaving. It is one of those things where I do think some of the positive that we had in on our financial report that Teresa just had was because we had this to lean on. But that's okay, because we're in a really good spot and we were wise with it, where I know some districts who chose to spend their ESSER money in different ways are in a hard spot now because they didn't look forward. And that was one thing that, as Mrs. DeGraw and I attended other like the IASBO and the superintendent groups, and we listened to the different people, we took their good advice and put it into place. We can't just pat ourselves on the back, but we did the best that we could, and we're in a good spot. So let me show you where we're at with the ESSER stuff. So in the discretionary and learning loss, this was the amount of money total that we received. Like I said, the audio systems addition were a big bulk of it. We had flooring in the junior high, flooring in Hamer, power school training for staff that we would have been able to get. And this was all of our people. Now, this was for about 13, 14 different people that went to this. That's why it feels like that much. But we've been able to, Mr. Guimar and Julie have done a great job of maximizing things on how we report, which helps us also not lose funding. The Hamer well came completely out of this. Just different updates. Our website and rooms, that app, we were able to pay for all of that, and then look at the bulk of the math and ELA curriculum. This is a great way to spend this money. I feel really good about it. The other 130 that was attached to the audio systems throughout every building, every classroom in the school, we're in a good spot. So when you look at that, who benefited from all of this with the audios, all students, we tried to make sure we spread that out. So this is a report exactly. This report matches everything on the federal programs drawdown. We will have an audit in the spring, sometimes after January, but it's pretty much all done. We have it all right here, where we have to say, this is where we spent the money, this was what it was for.
Did they come out to do that audit?
It's one that we send in the information to the state and
Okay.
they're able to check it. But where we've streamlined it, I think it should be a pretty straightforward audit for us.
Super.
And then with the bond, just our current summary. This is another one where there's a lot of good information, and I do wish I could have had this, but I know the board member said, we need to tell everybody, this is all the great things that we've been able to do with the bond. We've done awesome things. We are in such great shape because of the patrons that have helped us pass this. So, when the bond pass was at 21, I should have had that one at first. I think it was
It was
21.
in 21, we got. the
21,
one
22.
October of 21.
October 21, yep. And so here were the different, so the bond amount we had was 1.5. We were able to get 66,000 on interest that was able to be pulled in to also be spent on different things. And so right now our total remaining is 232, which we have earmarked for some projects still and track. We reached out to our council and we are right where we need to be, and we are, with bonds and levies, it's told that you have to spend 85% of it in the first 3 years or be planning on it. There's kind of a gray area with that. We are right where we need to be with that. And so we still have places where we can still have like the building signs, the track project, everything else with has been met. Now, we can still have a little bit of flexibility with this. If we spend a little bit less in one or others, it can still go to those main areas that we talked about in our original bond language, which would be general maintenance, safety, and that. So that's where the board, if we have different ideas or projects or things, that's what we can talk about with that. Anything else, Mrs. DeGraw? I know thank you for putting these together. Just so the board has the transparency, the community has the transparency with what we're doing. Questions or comments
The
or,
purple is what our original budget was for each of these categories. And if you remember, we had budgeted 350 for those roof projects, and the initial bids came in
we're really high.
really high. And so we had to go back and relook at what we did, and the board was willing to try something a little bit different, and we saved a significant amount of funds, even though that fund did go over the initial budget. But we have other funds that came in under budget.
But the reason why that one went over is we doubled the amount of roofs that we took care of, where on that initial one, it didn't include every part of the Panther Den. But when we went and looked at the second bid and option, or the different project approach that we could do, we were able to do the entire elementary school, the entire Panther Den, the high school legacy gym roof, and the entire main high school portion. And so that was great. That was great. Trying to think if there's anything else. Any questions or thoughts on this? Okay, so that's all I have on that section.
Super. Okay, we'll move on to 521 facility funding.
So we've talked in previous board meetings, so the 521 facility funding, this is the new funding mechanism that needed to be that they just created. This is what in the news you'll hear it as I don't know,
Christmas tree.
the Christmas tree bill. Yeah, that's the one.
But it's
Tax
facility funding to
I-
assist districts with capital projects.
So we have, just wanted to put to the board that we have completed all of our initial steps to the 10-year plan. So we did talk about the 10-year plan in June, and I was able to complete the rest of that those elements last week. And this was sent into the State Department, and this is just a letter from Superintendent Critchfield saying that they received it. We will be receiving 80% of our lump sum. I think it's approximately 2.4. Now, this is gonna be something that's gonna be important to understand. We are still running a supplemental levy and a plant facility. And that might be confusing to people saying, well, why do you need that if this is gonna be here for 10 years? The plant facility allows us to buy a school bus. It allows us to work on maintenance projects, general maintenance projects, buy toilet paper, different things like that. Where these new funds are only for capital projects. Now, if we were building a new school and I was in a district that just received 45 million, which some of the big districts do, they could take that and go build an elementary school, and every single purchase for that would be approved on, because the state bonded for this money, and so the strings of that bond are attached to it. So what happened is they pulled money from to go into this 2.4. And so it's not a true 2.4. We, over 10 years, there's about let me make there's about $1 million of that would have basically just got moved over. So there's not a lot of new money in this. It's, we received about $100,000 in lottery funds that went into our discretionary account that could be used for maintenance, to pay for maintenance personnel that didn't have strings attached to it. When they wrote this bill, they said, well, let's take that lottery money, put it in here and to make a pot, and then go out and bond for more to make a bigger pot, and then give it to districts. So we did, the question is, did we get new money? Yes, we did. But it also took some money away. And that's why the plant facility that we want to just renew, we're not trying to increase it. It's really important that we keep that plant facility for that purpose. Is that 100,000 that we normally spent would be into there. So in the past, we had about 100,000 that would go to a school bus out of the 300,000 that we would get a year. And then we would have 200,000 for projects because we didn't have something like this. But $100,000 got moved over here, so now we have to start thinking of the future plant facility of 100,000 for a school bus, 100,000 to kind of replace the
That's when we lost.
that we lost, and that gives us an extra 100,000 to pay for the supplies and things that we don't have access to.
Well, and the facility funding it limits us. We couldn't paint a classroom and pull those funds out of the facility funding. If we were remodeling the entire classroom, we could take those funds out of
Yes.
facility funding.
I-
And so it has to be a capital project, and there are lots of things with the grounds that we cannot use those funds for either.
And so that's the part that's hard to understand. When you get down into the details. I still feel like when we look back at the audit that Teresa talked about, we are being very careful with what we ask our patrons to pay, and they've been so gracious to our school district. But we need to be clear that this money does not replace. If you want to have a kind of a fair comparison, the bond that we just passed was a lifesaver for us to fix all of the things before. This is basically making it so we don't have to ask for another bond for major repairs. And this is gonna help us over the years to have a plan in place for roofs, because all the roofs will be able to do it, any plumbing systems, things like that. Potentially HVAC systems.
Do they intend doing this every 10 years? I can't remember.
That's a good question, and that was brought up in one of my superintendent meetings. And it might, if these funds are spent down beforehand, maybe it will come earlier, but I think that when we talked, I know it was mentioned that there was a Christmas tree bill, which means it bloomed into so many different things. Where they really just wanted to get, the initial intent was, let's help districts, they need the money. And then all these things got attached to it. And even though some of those things were like, hey, we really want to do this, the general conversations that were had, where I know it's not good, but it's a start in the right direction. Let's get it started and get it going. I do think as time goes on, it will improve. But I don't know if they can do it every 10 years, but I think it's a start, and I'm hoping that they will continue with that.
And just to be clear, will you talk about the levy and what it is purposed for?
So the levy, I can probably do that in conjunction with this.
Oh, it's the next one.
Yeah,
Super.
so the levy. Yeah. So there's a they're both considered a levy. One's a plant levy, which means the things have to go towards facilities or ways to help support the facilities. And the supplemental levy is anything just extra that we use. So the supplemental levy, when we go back to what Superintendent Critchfield said, well, you guys have experienced staff. How are you keeping your staff out here? This is the reason why. Since 2012, the district has voted for the supplemental levy, which we do pay our teachers a little better. I know that when I sent, we're required to send our salary schedules and if it, to ISBA and so we can compare where we're at. And I know another district in our county looked at ours and he's going to their school and saying, we have to do something like this because we're also losing teachers. We don't compete for exactly the same teachers, but it's worked good for us. Like this is the statistics that Superintendent Critchfield show us that this is a good thing. But it's not just teachers. It also helps supplement in the benefits for our classified staff. And we did increase we took a big jump 2 years ago. And we're still above, I would say most schools our size in this region. We pay our classified staff better than any other school. And this is only because of the supplemental levy. It is in the teachers' contracts that if this doesn't pass, that we will have to renegotiate salaries and benefits, and that could have a negative impact on which teachers decide to stay in the district. And so your question was, what's the difference between the two? The plant facility, the last one, I shouldn't say the first one was passed in 2015, because as I looked into it, the district since 94 has actually had some type of plant. The rules were different in the 90s and early 2000s on when you had to pass them and different things, but there was the district has had some type of plant facility collection that was voted on, and they've been like each of them had been about a 10-year vote, 94, 04, 15. That's why we don't hear about them all the time. But those are some of the reasons why we've been able to keep our schools in as good a shape as they are now.
And safe buses.
And the buses are safe. And so, I'm trying to think if there's anything specific on that. The plant facility requires a 55%. And the supplemental levy, requires a 51%. On the bottom of the next ones.
There's a section that's required by code.
Is this
that
one
we
it
have
right here?
to
Okay.
Release, what part I'm talking about.
So these are the parts that by code that we have to put in to meet the law. So this is just saying the notice that the Plant Facilities Reserve Fund election is gonna be held on November 5th. It's gonna require 55%. And the question is, should the community vote for allowing $300,000 per year for 10 years to continue? I think it's something that we've done. That part's with it, right? So when we look at the estimated amount, they're not able to, so this is the amount specific for that. The part that we can't, and I can talk about it here in this, but when we publish things, because of I can't remember the name of the bill. It's a tax relief bill. This is 292. There's somebody.
292.
The 292 tax relief bill actually lowers this for the patrons, but we can't communicate how much it lowers
Because it changes every year.
because it's not
It's
consistent.
based on some formula. And so we cannot tell our taxpayers how much it will reduce their tax.
At least we can in informational settings like this, but in our flyers that we send home. But this is basically the one that we have. So with the House Bill 292, it's estimated that it's gonna be less just to continue on with what we're doing. And so that's our hope that when you look at the historical amounts in 16-17, this was a year after that last one, it was $399 per 100,000. It did go down in 2021. That's because the previous bond dropped off, which is a good thing. It's lower, but then we voted to have the other bond come back on, but it still was significantly lower than what it was in 2015. And we're looking at that the estimated would be right around 259 with the projected 24-25 is where we're at. But this is the part where we can't communicate it or that way. Is that fair to say? Am I saying that the right way?
Yeah, you are.
Or at least publish it that way. We can.
Right, and we do have $326,000 that we received from the state this year to offset our bonds and levies that we
Payment.
levy on our patrons, which reduced our bond to 0. And it reduced our supplemental levy by the $26,000.
Yeah, and that's why this number that I'm circling right there, that 259 is where it's at. When you said the 359, that's not extra money that just goes into the general fund. It goes right into tax relief for the patrons. If that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Man, it's kind of confusing. I've been talking about this,
Taking us a little bit of time to understand it all.
so.
Some,
Any other questions or? Oh, here's the history of them, yeah. All that's in this information here. I wish, this is one that I hope people can go onto and look at. We do have the required language on here, so as people look at that, we have the required language by law. And we continue to go in and explain the differences, but if you're not looking at this every single day, you don't know all of the exact parts of it. So. I think I just completed 5.4.
I think so. Super.
Okay.
Okay, we have, Mrs. DeGraw, do we have a special or work meeting coming up?
I don't believe so, and I don't think anything in this meeting resulted with needing one.
Okay, our next regular meeting will be November 21st. And were you planning a public informational meeting?
Yes, I'm looking to schedule a public information meeting on the supplemental plant facility. We want to have a flyer out by next week, but we will post on social media. To invite people. Looking to have it at the auditorium. That's kind of where we're thinking, the high school auditorium where the seats are already set up. For people to do that in. And it would be at 7 p.m. that night. I know there's a home junior high wrestling match. That would be the 30th. October 30th, the day before Halloween.
Is that something we need to be?
You're welcome to. I'm probably going to talk mostly about this.
Yeah,
Like,
okay, so.
This is what it is, but again, I'm gonna open it up to the patrons to ask questions if they have any, and anybody. I know we get a few people. Thank you for those that do attend the meetings or listen in all the way to the end. If you do have questions on this, call me. Like if you have specific ones, we'd love to be prepared to answer those. Or if you can't make it to the 30th meeting, call us here. Come talk to us. We'll share anything that we have and just provide the reasons why we've proposed to run these. And again, I provide the information. I'm not here to try to convince you one way or another, but this information does show the reason why it's proposed on them. So October 30th at 7 p.m. after the junior high wrestling match.
Super. Okay. Well, it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
The floor would be open for a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I so move.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Is he still with us?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Cottle,
Aye.
Mrs. Rigby,
Aye.
Mrs. Perkins,
Aye.
and Mr. Burtonshaw.
We might get Mr. Burnshaw. He is traveling and he might be in a dead zone. But it looks like you have enough votes.
That motion passes. Thank you. We're adjourned.